Greetings, Guardians. The Zero Hour mission has been back for about a week in Destiny 2, and there is already debate and drama about if the mission is too hard, too easy, or just right. Before we go any further, I want to clarify what Bungie's goals were for the mission, and then we can discuss whether or not I believe the activity is too hard or too easy. Bungie wanted the mission to be difficult. They wanted it to remind players of the original Zero Hour's difficulty while still remaining fresh and unique. They also wanted the mission to be something iconic for the new and returning players, a unique memory shared amongst the current existing players of the game. And most importantly of all, they wanted all players to be able to experience the mission. This does not mean complete the mission, and I will explain that later on. I also want to comment that I do not believe that the Zero Hour and Whisper missions will be removed with the addition of the final shape. I believe they're going to be moved to the exotic rotating mission selection the same way that Revision Zero's quest was moved. Also, as a quick sidebar, I would like to state that I feel like Bungie was wrong for marking the mission as 1810 and then having 1830 enemies appear. This just made it so that new players were confused when they queue into an activity of a low light level only to be immediately met with enemies they cannot kill. I don't think the difficulty was actually bad at that level, but I think it was unfair to those players who didn't know what they were getting into. And it may not seem like it, but that's actually very important as to why there are people complaining about the difficulty of this activity, and I will be discussing that also later on. Anyway, let's get right back into the actual discussion. So Bungie wanted the mission to be difficult, and I honestly think they achieved that. I personally think the mission is rather well balanced on normal and legend difficulty. However, Zero Hour came out at what is probably the worst possible time for this type of difficult activity. This being because of the change 2 weeks ago that made all expansions, sparing Lightfall of course, free for all players. This brought a massive influx of new players who want to experience all of the activities the game has to offer before they no longer have access to the activities and quests. It also doesn't help that these new players have so much to learn within this short window. For Whisper, this was not a problem because the normal version was curated for players of all skill levels to complete. However, again, Bungie wanted Zero Hour to be hard, and for these new players who don't have viable weapons, exotics, high stat armor, any of the game knowledge that they need, this is just brutal. Now, there is an argument to be made that they should not be playing this activity, but they meet the light level requirement, so why shouldn't they? On the same tangent as the Whisper of the Worm, that activity for its normal difficulty is set to 1810 light level, the same thing that Zero Hour claims it's set at. However, playing both activities, you'll know that's not the case. So that's part of why the 1810 light level versus 1830 light level is a big deal. It makes players feel confused about one of the most important elements of the game, which is the difficulty. So then where is the major problem with this activity? In this case, the problem is that everyone has access to the Blessing of the Thunder Lord, Thunder God, the chest that gives you all 1810 gear to raise your light level. This makes it so that everyone believes that they can run this activity because they meet the minimum light level. This is where the topic from the very first sentence comes from, talking about how Bungie wanted all players to experience the activity, but not necessarily complete it. You see, the Zero Hour mission is supposed to be hard. It is supposed to set up this feeling of, okay, there is a deeper, harder side to this game that I have been breezing through because the vast majority of content for new players is 1600 light level. The lowest light level in the game, and you can do quite literally whatever you want and still make it through. And that's what is important here. The players aren't all meant to complete this activity. Legend exotic missions, Master Nightfalls, Legend Nightfalls, Legend campaigns, all of these are supposed to be relatively reserved. Some players are not supposed to be able to complete this challenge. However, they should at least attempt to complete the challenge and sometimes fail so they can see how much there is still to learn and how hard the game can truly be. This is part of what Bungie wants, and it will become a lot more obvious as I talk about the later segments about why I think the activity was indeed too hard. And this is part of the reason why I believe Zero Hour came out at one of the worst times possible for a difficult mission like this. Now that we've gone over the reason why I think it came out at a bad time, I now feel like it's fine for me to go into detail as to what elements of this activity make it hard. I personally think there are 4 main elements as to why people are believing this activity is overly hard. The first of which is the differing elemental shields on the Shanks. Now, this is a thing that was from the original 0 Hour and is a callback to it, but the elemental shields make the activity feel harder without actually making it harder. Shanks are typically a trash mob, meaning you get to kill a lot of them really easily. However, if you don't have the right element to break their shield, they take significantly longer to kill, making it feel like it's taking forever, making the activity feel harder. There are weapons that you can use to break those shields easily without having to change out your weapons, as I talked about in my 5 tips and tricks for the 0 Hour mission. If you haven't watched that video, you should go give it a check, give it a like, sub, all that stuff YouTubers say, just trying to make my way here. Anyways, it just makes it feel harder without actually being harder. The second element that makes the activity feel like it's hard is the timer. 40 minutes is a long enough time for the normal activity, and I personally am not opposed to timers. I really enjoy the rush of competing against one, but a new player is going to see that timer, see the damage they're doing, and just think, it's not possible. Pair that with a handful of deaths to the jumping puzzles or traps and they'll wash out. They won't feel the need to keep going for just an exotic. And that's on them personally, but it does make it feel harder. The third element that I think makes the activity feel really hard is the final boss fight. Not only does it have multiple phases, but it's in a really annoying kill box with too few areas to hide to let your shields regenerate, with a lot of ads just constantly spawning to annoy you. And during the second phase, the final boss becomes one of the most annoying enemies in the game, a Brig. And Brigs don't have a crit spot, making it feel like it takes even longer to kill them. I can only imagine how annoying it must be to be right there at the end with only a minute left, think you've won by taking out the boss, only for the Brig to spawn and realize that you have to do everything all over again. The fourth element is that the enemies just have a lot of health, and some can take quite some time to kill. This problem only gets worse if you're using non-viable weapons. And if you're a new player who only has the weapons and the light level from the gift of the Thunder God, then you're not going to have a lot of viable weapons. And this is going to make the activity feel almost unbearable. With all 4 of these elements combined, the mission is hard. And I would say paired with the timing and everything else, on normal difficulty, it probably is too hard. On normal difficulty, it should be about as hard as a Legend Nightfall, or the Whisper of the Worm quest. And for the Legend version, it probably should have been as hard as a Master Nightfall. With that being said, on the other side of the spectrum, you do have a lot of time to complete the mission on normal, which does make the mission more forgiving, and it doesn't have the multiplicity modifier, which means that as you add more Guardians, it only gets easier. Now, something that is annoying is that the path changes every single day, but only slightly. And that means that if you're attempting to run it and you're failing, you'll eventually learn the path and speed up each time, which also makes the activity easier. Another important thing to remember is that this activity is designed around a full fire team of 3 Guardians. So if you're going to play this activity, please find 2 other players to play through it with. You can use Discord or Fireteam Finder or whichever means you prefer. This will make the mission significantly more bearable for new players, and give you a great chance to learn about what you're doing and where you're going. I personally completed the activity solo, and prefer to play solo just because I am not too big of a fan of having to work with other people, but it is still an important option to have on the table. So overall, to give a summary of my opinion, the answer is probably yes. For normal difficulty, it is probably too hard, at least for the time it was released. Oh, and before people get mad about this topic, think about the new players. Think about what they had to learn in these past 2 weeks. All the subclass information, weapons, shields, enemy types, subclasses, whole Warlock, Hunter, Titan class information, all of that, just so they could stand a chance against this mission that may or may not rotate away. I still don't think it will rotate away, but it could. So instead of attacking and calling people just bad, let's try to ask them what weapons they're using, what builds they're doing, where they're getting caught, where they're dying, and let's try to give them a good direction to move in. Let's try to be constructive and helpful to our Guardians rather than just pointing the finger and saying, "You're bad at the game, get good." Because yes, they do have to get good, but it doesn't have to be a negative thing. We, as a community, can help them learn. And that's something I personally feel is one of the things that the community of Destiny 2 is sorely lacking on. We just kind of leave the new lights behind as we move towards the final shape. So when you go to do the mission at this point, reach out to a newbie. Say, "Hey, I'm going to run the mission. I'll take new players. I'll teach." Yes, it will take longer, but it feels so much more fulfilling to actually help them rather than just make fun of them. And remember, Guardians, happy hunting.